She died in 9F, but now she lives in my reflection mirror identity drama. The building wasn't supposed to be loud. It was one of those quiet mid-century blocks where neighbors nodded but rarely spoke, where the stairwells smelled faintly of stone and rain, and the mailboxes told stories only of unpaid bills and advertising circulars. I moved into apartment 9G thinking I'd finally found silence, a place to fade into after the city had drained every last shred of my energy. The landlord had barely looked me in the eye, sliding the keys across the chipped Formica desk with the kind of quickness that suggested he didn't want to know too much. 9G. Last one on the left. Welcome. And that was it. No background check, no small talk. The rent was suspiciously low for a neighborhood like this, but I didn't ask questions. I had just lost a job I didn't love and ended a relationship I should have left months earlier. I needed a place where nobody would care what time I got home, how long I stayed in bed, or if I started drinking before noon. And for the first few days, it was exactly that. Numb, gray, and quiet. But then I heard the crying. It started around the third night. At first, I thought it was the pipes. Old buildings often mimic grief with their groans and knocks. But it was unmistakably human. Muffled sobs, the kind that hitch in the throat and drop suddenly into silence, like someone trying desperately not to be heard. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard it more clearly. A woman weeping softly. Then nothing. I waited, hand on the wall, but the building had already swallowed her back. I assumed it was a neighbor in 9F. Her unit shared a wall with mine. The next morning, I passed her door on my way out and paused. It was identical to mine except for a small, wilted wreath of dried lavender hanging from a rusted nail. The air smelled faintly of something floral and acidic. I listened. Nothing. Then I heard the bolt slide from the other side and quickly walked away, pretending I hadn't been standing there like some creep. I didn't see who opened it, but I felt watched the rest of the day. Over the next week, the crying became a pattern, always between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m., never louder than a whisper, never angry, just deep, endless sorrow. I couldn't sleep through it. It got into my head like smoke, curling behind my eyes and filling my dreams with dripping ceilings, dark hallways, and locked doors. I began to time it, even record it once on my phone. When I played it back the next day, there was only silence. I boosted the audio, adjusted the levels. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. I asked around. Not directly, of course. At the corner bodega, I mentioned I was new to the building, and the clerk's eyes narrowed slightly. "You in the back unit?" I nodded. He hesitated. "Then you're next to her." He didn't elaborate. I waited. He didn't speak. Eventually, he added a pack of gum to my bag without scanning it. "You let me know if anything strange happens, okay?" I wanted to ask what he meant, but something about the tone told me I wouldn't get a real answer. That night, I stayed up. I sat on the floor, back against the shared wall, lights off, 2:13 a.m. The crying began. I pressed my ear close, heart racing. But this time, it was different. There was a sound behind it, a low scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. Then a wet thump. Then silence. I waited, holding my breath, until I heard the door in 9F open and close. I bolted upright and rushed to my own door. I peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. But her door was open, just a crack, and from the gap spilled dim, flickering light. Not warm yellow like a lamp, but blue, sickly, like the light from a television stuck on static. I should have walked away. I should have locked my door and gone back to sleep. But I stepped out. I moved slowly, each step careful on the faded carpet. Her door creaked open a little more as I approached, like it was inviting me. The inside of her apartment was wrong. Everything was wrong. The furniture looked melted, drooping toward the floor like wax. The walls were stained with black streaks that pulsed slightly, like veins. And there, in the center of the room, sat a woman on the floor, knees tucked to her chest, facing away from me. Her hair hung in thick, matted ropes. She rocked slightly, and the television in front of her displayed nothing but a dark, rippling shape. I tried to speak, but my mouth felt full of ash. I raised my hand slowly, as if to knock on air. She turned her head, just a fraction, enough to show part of her cheek, which was raw, like she'd been crying acid. Her eye caught mine. It was empty, not blind, just void, a complete absence of presence. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and ran. I didn't look back until I was inside my own apartment, bolted in, sitting on the floor. The crying didn't happen again for a week. But something else started. Whispers. I'd wake up at 3:07 a.m. to soft voices beneath the floorboards. Not words, just the cadence of conversation, like a radio tune just off station. I asked the landlord about the woman in 90F. He looked at me too long before saying, 9F is unoccupied, I told him I'd seen her, heard her. He frowned and shuffled through a folder, then held up a lease. Last tenant in 9F was Evie. Moved in 2004, died in 2007. Suicide. I didn't believe him. I showed him the crying recording. Of course, there was nothing. I even brought him to my apartment one night. We waited together. Nothing. No sounds. No lights. He left annoyed. The next day, I found a lavender wreath hanging on my door. No note, just the scent. Sour and sweet and wrong. That night, I dreamed of her. She was in my kitchen chopping onions slowly, crying. Every time she cut deeper, her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. Her eye met mine, and she whispered something I couldn't hear, but felt. We were all tenants here. I woke up with wet socks. I hadn't worn any to bed. My apartment smelled like lavender. The crying started again the following night, but not in her apartment. In mine. I pressed my ear to the wall, but it wasn't coming from there. It was coming from inside, from the bathroom. I opened the door slowly. The mirror was fogged, though I hadn't showered. In the center of the mirror, written in a dripping hand, were the words, "Let-me-sti." I scrubbed it off, furious, terrified, unsure if I was losing my mind or being played. But the more I cleaned, the more the letters reappeared, like the mirror was sweating them out. I covered the glass with a towel and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the towel was gone. In its place, the mirror was cracked down the center, and my reflection didn't move when I did. It just stared, unblinking. Behind it, I saw her, the woman from 9F, standing in my kitchen, smiling. Just for a moment, then gone. I moved the next day. Told the landlord I had a family emergency. Didn't even wait for my deposit. Packed a single bag and left everything else behind. I never went back, but sometimes late at night, I wake to the sound of crying. Not in my room, not in my building, just behind my wall. And when I check the mirror, it fogs just a little. Enough for the words to start forming again. I didn't go far after leaving that building, just across the city into a much newer place. Sterile white painted walls, artificial wood floors, and motion-sensing hallway lights that blinked awake like startled eyes whenever someone walked by. There were no odd smells, no groaning pipes, no wraiths of dried herbs on any door. The neighbors were cheerful in a bland, forgettable way. They waved but didn't press for conversation, and I buried myself in routines like sandbags, hoping to keep whatever had followed me from breaching the surface of my life again. For the first few nights, it worked. The silence was clean. No weeping through the walls, no whispers in the corners of my mind, and no impossible reflections. I told myself it had all been a breakdown, that I'd been unraveling, that the stress of unemployment, the heartbreak, the isolation had finally cracked me open. I even deleted the recordings from my phone and threw out the clothes I wore that night I saw her face. It was a ritual of separation, burying the evidence to convince myself it never really happened. But I should have known better. You can't bury something that has your name on it. The first sign came quietly. I was brushing my teeth one morning, and when I leaned to spit into the sink, I saw a hair, not mine, stuck to the faucet, long, black, and coiled like a question mark. I lived alone. I shaved my head. I told myself it must have come in on a guest's coat or a borrowed towel. But then came the second sign. I began waking up to find my fridge open. Not wide, just an inch, like someone had taken something out and forgotten to close it. The milk carton was always slightly turned, the eggs a little rearranged. And once, the freezer was covered in fine lavender powder. I didn't own anything lavender-scented. It was a precise shade of pale violet I recognized too well. Convinced myself I was sleepwalking. I even set up my phone to record a time, lapsed through the night, propped it on a stack of books across from my bed. The next morning, the footage was corrupted. It played only a few seconds before distorting into lines and flickering static. At exactly 2:39 a.m., a frame of deep blackness appeared, then a single frozen image, my own sleeping form, with a shadow bent over me. I froze the screen and stared at it for hours. The figure was half invisible, as if made of mist and regret, but the hair was unmistakable. Long black, heavy with water. That night, I locked my bedroom door from the inside, pushed a chair beneath the handle, and tried to sleep with the lights on. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up not in my bed, but lying flat on the cold bathroom tiles, shivering. The mirror above the sink was fogged. A familiar sentence was smeared in the condensation, only this time it didn't ask. It demanded, "Let-me-in." I started losing time. Whole hours would vanish. I'd look at the clock at 3:12 p.m., blink, and it would be past 6. Sometimes I'd find myself outside, standing in the parking garage barefoot, holding my apartment keys in my mouth. I started getting calls from an unknown number. When I picked up, it was just static and the faint sound of weeping. The worst part was that I started craving the sound. It had become a melody in my head, a dark lullaby I couldn't shake. I started pressing my ear to walls again, even though I knew there was no one crying behind them. But I always hoped. That's when I did something I hadn't planned on. I went back to the benign G. I told myself I just needed closure to see it one last time and prove it was real. That I hadn't invented the entire thing. The landlord wasn't there anymore. The office was boarded up, the windows spray painted black, a sign on the front door read, "Condemned, unsafe structure," and thick yellow tape curled around the handles like crime scene streamers. But the side door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like mold and wet cement. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing dark stains underneath, like bruises on the building itself. The hallway lights didn't work. I used my phone flashlight, and every step echoed like a heartbeat. When I reached the 9th floor, something strange happened. My phone died. Not slowly, it just shut off completely at 64% battery. I stood in the dark, swallowing panic. But I didn't leave. I didn't run. I kept walking. Apartment 9F had no door anymore, just a gaping hole like a broken mouth. Inside, the room was filled with water. A shallow pool covered the entire floor, reflecting a soft, unnatural light from nowhere. The furniture was gone, and the walls were covered in what looked like handwriting. Dozens of sentences all written in a looping hand that bled into the wallpaper. I stepped in. The water was cold. Not freezing, but cold like the bottom of a well. My footsteps sent small ripples that made the words seem to move, to breathe. I bent to read one. She told me she would leave. She lied. Another, he closed the door, but I was still inside. And another, every mirror is a doorway. Then, I heard it. Behind me, the same dragging sound. I turned slowly. She stood at the edge of the water barefoot, soaking wet, arms limp at her sides. Her face was mostly hidden beneath her hair, but I could see her mouth. It was stitched shut, not metaphorically. Actual thread black and tight through torn skin. Her eyes were not empty this time. They were angry. She raised her hand. Her fingers were long and twisted, like roots that had grown in the dark. She pointed at the wall behind me. I turned. There was a mirror. I don't know how I didn't notice it before. It wasn't hanging. It floated, suspended in midair, perfectly still. My reflection wasn't mine. It was her. She stared back at me, and then, without moving her lips, I heard her voice inside my head. "Let me go, or I stay with you forever." I stumbled back, slipping in the water. My hands hit the floor, and suddenly it was burning. The water boiled where I touched it, and the words on the wall started to smolder, curling into smoke. The air filled with the scent of lavender and blood. I ran. I didn't look back. I fell down the stairs, scraping my knees, my palms, but I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the rain, the yellow tape catching on my arms like fingers trying to pull me back in. I went straight to a motel and slept with the lights on. The next day, I bought a mirror from a second-hand shop. A small one. Round, no frame. I placed it on the floor and stared into it for hours. Nothing moved. No voice. I thought maybe I had done it. Maybe I had released her. Maybe she had simply needed to be seen, to be acknowledged. Maybe she'd been trapped all this time by someone else, and I had been the final witness, the last door. I started to believe I was free, that maybe she was gone, that maybe the cursed, or ghost, or whatever she was had ended. Then the calls started again. Only now they weren't from a blocked number, they came from my own number. When I answered, it wasn't static, it was my own voice. Crying, whispering, "Please, let me out." And in the motel mirror for just a second, my reflection was smiling. But I wasn't. I left the motel the next morning with a tremor in my hands I couldn't shake. My own voice pleading from the phone. My voice, weeping like the woman once did, was a kind of fear I wasn't ready for. I tried rationalizing it. Spoofed calls, maybe. Psychological echoing. Trauma-induced mimicry. But deep down I knew none of that mattered. None of that applied anymore. Something had cracked through whatever wall keeps the rational world and the other thing apart. And I had been the crack. I changed my number. Bought a new phone, paid in cash, used no name. I even switched models 3 times in 5 days. Always leaving without warning, always with one eye on the rearview mirror. But you can't outrun what lives in mirrors. The motel bathroom became my enemy. I covered every reflective surface with paper towels, black tape, or turned them against the wall. But sometimes they turned themselves back. One night I returned to my room and found the mirror uncovered, fogged as though someone had just stepped out of a hot shower. I hadn't used it that day. And written, again in that horrible, familiar hand, "AF I'm Yo-You, BREAREU." That's when I began to suspect the truth. Whatever was in apartment 9F hadn't followed me. It had become me. Or worse, it had begun to replace me. My reflection would blink when I didn't. Smile too long. I started recording myself sleeping again, not for ghosts, but for proof that I still existed in one unbroken timeline. But on the third night, the footage showed something else. Something impossible. The video began normally, me asleep, motionless under thin modal blankets. At 2:42 a.m. I sat up, but I didn't wake. My eyes remained closed. I stood, walked to the corner, and just stared at the blank wall. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, I raised both hands and began scratching the paint with my fingernails. Over and over, until the wall was covered in faint gouges. I stopped only to turn toward the camera and smile. The same smile I'd seen in the mirror. When I woke and watched it, I didn't remember any of it. I checked the wall. The scratches were real. That day, I went to a clinic. I told them I was losing time, experiencing hallucinations. They gave me a brochure, a pamphlet about stress-induced dissociation, and told me I needed rest. They didn't believe me. Nobody would, not unless they saw what I saw. And that's when the idea struck me. I needed a second witness. Someone who didn't know the story. Someone who couldn't be primed. So I did the unthinkable. I called Marcy, my ex. We hadn't spoken since the breakup. She answered cautiously, suspiciously polite, like someone picking up a call from a known number that had only ever brought pain. I told her I needed a favor, a big one, and that I wouldn't ask unless it was serious. I could hear the silence stretch on the line. Then she said, "Where are you?" I met her in a coffee shop downtown, bright, overlit, buzzing with chatter. Everything that felt alive. Safe. She looked better than I remembered. Lighter somehow. She asked me if I was okay, and I couldn't answer. I just handed her the phone, opened the video, and told her to watch. Her expression changed immediately. Her brows drew down. Her mouth tightened. She leaned closer. And when the version of me in the video smiled at the camera, she dropped the phone on the table. "Is this a joke?" she asked, but her voice shook. "Because it's not funny." "It's not a joke," I said. "That's me, but I don't remember doing any of it. I didn't do it." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes flicking over my face like she was trying to spot a difference. Some tiny asymmetry. Some sign. "You look off," she whispered. I don't know what it is. Just different." That night, she offered to stay over. Not out of affection. Out of fear. She said someone needed to be there in case I sleepwalked again. She set up her own phone on the nightstand to record. We fell asleep with the lights on, but it wasn't me who moved first. At 3:11 a.m., she sat up. Eyes closed, face blank. Her body turned toward me, and slowly, deliberately, she leaned down and whispered something into my ear. The camera didn't pick up the sound, but I jolted awake the moment her lips left my skin. I grabbed her, shook her. She didn't respond. Only blinked twice, then lay back down. When I checked her phone the next morning, we watched the video together in silence. She had no memory of getting up, of speaking. When I asked her what she whispered, she started crying. Not because she remembered, but because something inside her told her she didn't want to. That's when I knew. It wasn't about me anymore. It had never just been me. It was contagious, like a mirror virus, a psychic infection. And the entry point was always the same, reflection. I told her to leave, begged her to go and never contact me again. She didn't argue. She packed and left before noon. I sat alone in that room, every mirror covered, every screen turned to face the wall, and still I could feel it. Watching, from somewhere just outside the boundary of light. That night, I dreamed of her again, the woman from 9F. But she wasn't weeping. She was laughing, sitting cross-legged on the ceiling like gravity didn't apply to her anymore. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, mouth open wide with thread hanging loose from the corners. And I realized something. She was happy. She was free. Because now I was the one trapped. I woke screaming. And from the modal hallway, I heard footsteps, wet, dragging footsteps. I grabbed my things, just a bag and my phone, and ran. I didn't pay. Didn't say goodbye. Just drove for hours, no direction. Just movement. At sunset, I stopped at a gas station in a forgotten town, filled up, and used the bathroom. The mirror was cracked. But I looked anyway, and there it was. A third eye, center of my forehead, open. Blinking slowly, I touched the skin. It was smooth. No scar, no lid. But the reflection smiled again, and whispered, not in sound, but thought you see me now. I left the gas station and drove again faster. I don't know where I'm going. I don't think it matters. Every road is the same now. Every stop, every building, every glass surface carries a chance to glimpse something you shouldn't. It's not the woman I fear anymore. It's who she leaves behind in her place. Because I don't know how much of me is still me. I forget things, important things. My birthday, my favorite color, the name of my dog when I was a kid, but I remember her face perfectly. I remember her eyes, and the way her smile always lingers a second too long. I remember the crying, and the lavender. I don't sleep much now, not because I'm afraid, but because when I dream, I smile. And I'm beginning to enjoy it. The town's blurred together, stitched by the same flickering gas station signs and rust-colored dirt roads that seemed to loop no matter how far I drove. I stopped using GPS after the third time it rerouted me in a perfect circle. I'd left at sunrise and returned at sunrise without sleeping, crossing the same highway sign that read, "Welcome to Avonhurst." 3 separate times, from 3 different directions. That's when I stopped trying to leave. I rented a cabin. Remote, no Wi-Fi, no mirrors. I told the owner I was a writer working on a book about isolation. She smiled like she didn't believe me but took the cash without questions. She gave me 1 key and warned me about the generator. It sputters if you use too many lights at once. Don't push it, she said. I nodded, already wondering how many windows I'd need to cover to stop the reflections at night. I spent the first 2 days taping garbage bags to glass, painting over shiny surfaces with black spray paint. I removed the silverware from the drawers. Even polished metal carried enough shine to let something look back. I lived on cans and crackers. Slept little, sat in silence. But the silence wasn't silent. It breathed. There was a pulse in the cabin walls, soft but persistent, like the whole structure was exhaling around me. And I knew what it wanted. To lull me. To loosen the knots inside me that were still holding. On the 3rd night, I woke to water. A slow dripping, rhythmic, too perfect to be accidental. I followed it barefoot through the dark, floor cold against my soles. It wasn't coming from the bathroom or the kitchen. It was coming from the center of the living room. From nowhere. Just droplets falling soundlessly onto the wooden floor. Vanishing on contact, I watched them fall. They didn't leave a mark. Not wet, not cold, just gone. The dripping stopped a moment. I blinked, and in the stillness that followed, I heard her voice again. Not crying. Laughing. But it came from inside me, from behind my own teeth. I tried to scream, and my voice came out in 2 pitches. One mine, one not. I clamped a hand over my mouth and backed away. But the laughter kept going, echoing. It only stopped when I punched myself hard enough to see white. When I woke hours later, my knuckles were swollen and my lips bloody. But the voice was gone. I thought I'd broken something important. Maybe snapped the thread that tethered her to me. But no, that was the night I learned the real horror wasn't her replacing me. It was becoming one. A shared body. Shared breath. She didn't want to take me. She wanted us. The next week passed in hallucinations I couldn't trust. I wrote down everything, kept journals in case I lost time again, but the handwriting began to shift. Every 5th or 6th line would curl into something different. Old-fashioned, elegant, foreign. I burned one of the pages after it addressed me by name. Her name Evie. I was never Evie, but I said it out loud once in the middle of the night just to test how it felt. The floorboards sighed beneath me like they approved. I tried rituals, salt, candles. Latin I didn't understand. Nothing worked. The silence always returned louder, like static in the soul. And that's when I heard about the Keeper, an online forum buried behind dead links and obscure message boards, full of stories like mine, though most were shorter, briefer encounters, dreams, disappearances. One thread mentioned a man called the Keeper, someone who collected these entities, who offered a kind of storage, a place to lock them away for a price. Most users mocked it. Creepypasta. Urban legend. But one comment stood out. A woman claiming to have met him. She wrote it. He wears no shadow but casts one on your future. He took mine in exchange for my sister. She still sleeps without mirrors. I see her smile sometimes in dreams, but I think it's him smiling through her. Below that, an address. Handwritten. Blurry. But I copied it down. I didn't hesitate. The town wasn't on any real map. I drove east for a day and a half before the signs stopped appearing. Just one long dirt road, the sun stuck in perpetual gray. I arrived at dusk, the sky bruised and heavy. A stone building stood crooked against the trees, like it had grown there rather than been built. No windows. One wooden door, blackened with age. A single brass handle in the center. I knocked. No answer. The door opened on its own. The room inside was colder than the night. Stone walls, no lights, yet everything was visible. Dim but clear, like the world had turned down the contrast. He sat behind a desk made of bones. Real or carved, I didn't want to know. His face was smooth, too smooth, like it had never worn expressions. But his eyes were wrong. No irises. Just white, as if staring into 2 full moons. He didn't speak, only gestured for me to sit. I did. I don't remember what I said, only that I begged. I offered anything. My memories, my time, even my own reflection. When I finally looked up, he had placed a mirror on the table between us. No frame, just a disc of glass, cold and quiet. In it, I saw her again, but she looked different, calmer, curious, her head tilted like she was trying to understand why I was still resisting. He finally spoke, voice like wind against ice. "You can lock her, or live with her." I asked what he meant. He said, "To lock her, you must replace her. Give her another, someone closer than blood." "I don't have anyone," I whispered. "Then find someone," he replied. "You've already infected them." Marcy. I hadn't spoken to her since that night, but I remembered her last text days later. "You didn't tell me it stays in my dreams." I begged for another way. He said nothing. The mirror pulsed once, then went still. I left with nothing in my hands and everything broken inside. Back at the cabin I packed. I deleted the forums, burned the journals, got in the car and started driving toward Marcy's city. Not with a plan, but with a need. A choice. She didn't answer the first 3 calls. The 4th time she picked up, voice quiet. I told her I was sorry, that I needed to see her just one more time. She paused, then gave me an address, a small house outside town, new, modern, clean, her safe place. I arrived at night. She opened the door slowly, eyed me like a dog sniffing for poison. "Have you seen it again?" she asked. I nodded. Her face fell. She let me in. The house smelled like cinnamon and candles. Too normal. Too kind. It hurt. I sat on the couch. She made tea. We didn't speak much, but I watched her movements. Fluid, nervous. Her shadow moved wrong. Not off, but faster than her. Just a fraction. Enough. I realized something then. It wasn't just me anymore. She was already gone. Replaced. Maybe since the night she whispered into my ear. Maybe it had never been her that left the motel. Maybe I was too late. She returned with tea, smiled, sat across from me. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," she said. "She's not angry. She just needed a home." Her eyes glowed for a moment, just a flicker, like twin moons. I stared into my tea and saw her reflection instead of mine. She leaned forward. "Let's stop running, together." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, the smile felt real, because I finally understood. There would be no keeper, no cure, no end. There was only spread. And now it was my turn. We didn't speak of her again. Not directly. Marcy, or whatever inhabited her now, acted as though nothing was unusual, as if our last conversation hadn't ended in shaking hands and fractured reality. But there was a rhythm to everything she did, a cadence in her speech and her movements that felt rehearsed. Too perfect. Too even. It was like watching a marionette perform the motions of a life it had only studied from the outside. And I mirrored it. At first out of fear. Then, as days passed, something else crept in. A comfort, the absence of confusion, the lack of choice. My body relaxed in her presence, even when my mind screamed. We were aligned somehow. The thing inside her and the echo inside me hummed at the same frequency. We didn't sleep in separate rooms. She insisted I stay near her. Not sexually, not even romantically, but as if we were magnets and distance was agony. I asked her one night, "Is she still you?" She didn't answer. Just smiled, tilted her head, and whispered, "I am what I had to become." The next morning, my reflection didn't mimic my blink. It blinked first. I stared for 5 minutes. Then, for the first time, I blinked second. And I didn't feel afraid. That scared me more than anything else. I stayed at the house. We didn't leave. We didn't invite anyone in. The mail stacked at the door. Calls went unanswered. One morning I found a sticky note on the fridge, not in my handwriting or hers. Something looping, elegant, slanted hard to the left. "Soon." I showed it to her. She looked at it and nodded slowly. She remembers everything, even what hasn't happened yet. I started having dreams again. But they weren't nightmares. They were instructional. Structured, like training videos made for the subconscious. They showed me how to walk through walls without moving, how to silence a room by unthinking, how to dissolve a person's memory of you just by watching them from a corner. In the dreams, I was always in the same place, a hallway with no doors, no lights, and no end. I never saw her in the dreams, but I felt her guiding me. By the 4th night, I could move inside them freely. I could run, float, even whisper into the ears of shadows and watch them shift. I was learning her language. And once, I woke up mouthing a word I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. Velas, and I googled it. No results. No language. No match. But when I said it out loud again, the house made a noise, like all the walls had sighed at once. Marcy came into the room seconds later, wide-eyed as if summoned. "Don't speak that," she said. "Not yet." I asked her what it meant. She looked at me, her pupils wide and trembling, and said, "It's a command. But we don't give those, not until she's done preparing us." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. That night, we sat at the dining table across from one another and shared a meal of things neither of us remembered cooking. Stew. Bread. Something sweet and sticky. The lights flickered twice, and she asked me, "Do you remember your name?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not even a breath. My mind reached for the syllables, but they skittered like insects behind my eyes. I remembered numbers, dates, the smell of lavender, the sound of water dripping in silence, but not my name. She smiled sadly. "It's okay, she's almost done with you." I stood suddenly, knocked the chair over. "Done." She nodded. "You weren't the first. You won't be the last." "Then what am I?" I asked. But she was already gone. Not left the room. Just gone. Like a light turned off in one part of the house. The mirror above the fireplace showed me sitting alone, but when I turned to look, Marcy was there again, staring back. I turned around. The space was empty. I turned again. Still there. In the glass, she was speaking, mouthing something over and over. I pressed my hand to the mirror. The words became clearer. "She needs another. She needs another. She needs another." I whispered, "Huko." My own reflection smiled and said aloud, "You choose." The next days passed in blur. The house shifted when I slept. Doors disappeared. New ones appeared. The attic was never accessible, until one morning the ladder was down and the trapdoor open, spilling cold air into the hall. I climbed. At the top, I found nothing. Just a large rectangular mirror leaning against the far wall, covered in a black velvet cloth. The moment I saw it, I knew it was hers. The original. The place she had come through. The place she had been. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I waited. Researched. Not online. Those days were gone. I read books that shouldn't have been in Marcy's house. Ancient volumes with no author. Pages bound in rough leather, smelling of dust and mildew, and something metallic. One had an entire chapter devoted to the theory of reflected souls. It spoke of entities not born of death, but of interrupted identity. People who had forgotten who they were so completely that their reflections were forced to create a self of their own. An independent echo, sustained by attention and repetition. They could survive in glass, water, polished metal. They could feed on recognition, on fear, on grief, on guilt, and once strong enough they could step through. But only if invited. The chapter ended with one line. "If it stares too long, it's not looking at you, it's looking for you." I knew what she needed. What she'd been waiting for all along. A permanent host. A life to finish. A story to inhabit. Mine was too broken. Too incomplete. But someone else's someone knew. That night I went online. Not through a browser. I used the dark apps. Places where people reached out in desperation. I posted a message. "Haunt need help. We'll pay cash." No cops. No therapists. Only the brave. 3 replies. I picked the one who sounded the most skeptical. A man named Reed, 32. Believed in ghosts. Didn't believe in demons. He arrived 2 nights later. Kind eyes. Slight limp. Said he used to hunt haunted places with his brother until his brother went missing. "You sure it's something real?" he asked, scanning the room with a handheld EMF device. I nodded. "Very real." "Okay, let me do a sweep." I led him to the attic, told him I'd never opened the mirror. He smirked. "Good call. They say the glass is a veil. Cross it wrong and something comes back." He approached it, pulled the velvet cloth aside, and said nothing, just stared. I watched him from the corner. He didn't blink. The EMF reader in his hand began to shriek, then shorted out. Sparks flew. He didn't flinch, just whispered, "Just beautiful. Da." "What do you see?" I asked. He blinked slowly, turned to me. But his eyes weren't his anymore. They were too pale, too wide, and smiling. Always smiling. "I see her," he said. "She's lonely." "Will you stay?" I asked, voice barely a breath. He nodded. She wants me too." I left him there, closed the attic door, locked it, listened as he began to hum, the same melody I'd heard months ago behind the walls of apartment 90F. The weeping didn't return, but the house exhaled again. Long. Relieved. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Looked at myself. Truly looked. My name still didn't come. But something else did. A sense of peace. Like I had completed a task I'd been designed for. Like I was finally empty enough to sleep. And when I smiled, the reflection smiled too. But this time, it didn't feel like mimicry. It felt like we were both agreeing. I turned off the light and went to bed. Somewhere above, the attic creaked. And in the dark, I whispered her name. Evie. Just once. Just enough. And the mirror didn't fog. It glowed. Weeks passed. The house fell into stillness again. Not the brittle, waiting silence of before, but something thicker, like breath held underwater. The kind of quiet that isn't empty but watching. I stopped checking the attic. There was no need. Reed never came down. The mirror stayed uncovered, the doors stayed locked, and at night, I heard no movement, just a gentle hum, low and constant, like a distant song stuck in the beams of the house itself. Marcy, or whatever had become of her, smiled more. She cooked meals I never saw her prepare, all familiar dishes I couldn't remember liking until I tasted them. She'd hum while slicing fruit with knives that never dulled. I stopped asking questions, stopped trying to remember the rules of the world outside. We had our rituals. Breakfast at sunrise. No lights after sunset. No reflections after noon. It was all instinct now. One morning, I found my phone buried in a drawer I didn't remember using. It had battery somehow. 52%. There was only one photo in the gallery, me and Marcy sitting on the porch, eyes too dark, smiles too perfect. I didn't remember taking it. I didn't remember it happening. But it was dated 1 week ahead. I deleted it. It came back the next morning, this time with a third figure in the background, standing at the tree line, barefoot, hair wet. Evie, Evie. Smiling. I deleted that too. It returned again, closer. By the fourth day, she was sitting next to me in the photo, hand on my shoulder, head tilted, as if whispering. I didn't touch the phone again. I left it in the fireplace and watched it melt into black glass. That night, I woke to water dripping again, but not from the ceiling, from me. My skin was soaked, my hair clung to my temples, though I hadn't moved. The bedsheets were dry, the room was dry. But I dripped, and when I stood in the hallway mirror, just for a second, I wasn't alone in the reflection. My mouth was closed, but hers was open, mouthing something I almost understood. The next morning, Marcy said nothing, just poured tea and asked if I remembered my childhood yet. I shook my head. She smiled. That's good. She's nearly finished. I asked her, what happens when she's finished? She didn't respond, but her shadow nodded. That was the day I stopped using pronouns for myself. Not we, not I, just the movement of the day, the doing, the being. My old self was brittle now, a dry leaf in the wind. Sometimes I'd find scraps of memory in the corners of the house. A shoelace that felt like it belonged to someone younger. A drawing of a face I couldn't place but recognized deep in my bones. I once found a photo tucked into a book that had no title, showing a young boy standing in front of apartment 90F, holding a wreath of lavender, smiling. I couldn't tell if it was me, but I knew it had been someone. By the end of the third week, the mirrors stopped working. Not cracked, not broken, just blank. No reflection at all. You'd look in, and the glass would shimmer, then show nothing. Not the wall behind you, not the room, just absence, like the mirror had forgotten how to reflect. Marcy nodded when I mentioned it. Oh, she's made room for more. Ah, more, I asked. She looked out the window. There are others. They're coming, like you did. That night, the humming stopped. Total silence. No wind, no insects, no breath. I lay in bed with my eyes open, waiting for something I couldn't name. At 20:12 a.m., the time I used to hear her weep behind the wall in 9G, I heard a knock. Not at the front door, at the attic. 3 soft knocks. Then a voice. Ready. It was Reed's voice, but not. Too flat. Too practiced. I did door opened anyway, slow. Sighing, I sat up. The hallway was pitch black, but I could see perfectly. Every grain of wood, every scratch on the floor, every breath of dust frozen mid-air. A figure stepped out of the attic. Not Reed. Not Evie. Something else. A body shaped like memory. Every detail flickered. Child, woman, man, shadow. Like a stuttering film reel. The face shifted. Sometimes mine. Sometimes hers. Sometimes someone I couldn't recognize but felt shame when I looked at. It walked toward me. No sound. No wait. And then it stopped at the foot of my bed. I didn't scream. I only whispered, "What are you?" It tilted its head. Then, without moving its mouth, the answer echoed in my skull. "What you forget to be." I asked, "What happens now?" It smiled and said, "No, you choose." The attic mirror appeared behind it, hanging midair, glowing faintly. A tear opened in the glass, like skin splitting. I saw a city on the other side, mine. The old streets, the window of apartment 9G. I saw a man inside, alone, scared, ear to the wall, listening. I saw myself, the version of me before all this, still whole, still human, still unaware. "Is that now?" I asked. The figure shook its head. "Not yet, but soon. What happens if I go through? You start over, and so does she. And if I stay, you finish." And she moves on. I looked behind me. Marcy stood in the doorway. Her eyes were closed, but her smile, too wide, too still, waited. Her shadow no longer matched her posture. It flickered like it was dancing, celebrating. "Do I get to be whole again?" I asked the figure and nodded, in pieces. "But yes." I stood. The house held its breath. I took one step toward the mirror, then another. With each step, I felt memory peel away like bark from old wood. My name, My past, the boy in the photo, the man who heard crying through the wall, gun, and then, one step before the mirror, I stopped, not out of fear, but clarity. I turned, looked at Marcy, at the figure of the house that had cradled all of this. She doesn't want a door, I said. She wants a story. The figure smiled wider. She wants truth, and I understood the crying, the whispers, the mirrors. It wasn't about escape, it was about presence. She wasn't haunting us, we were haunting her. Echoes of unfinished people, bouncing between glass and memory, until someone remembered her fully. Until someone stopped running. I reached into the mirror. Not through, but into. My arm shimmered. My skin cracked like porcelain. I felt her take my hand, not pull, not consume. Hold. Behind me, Marcy exhaled. The walls sighed. The figure nodded once and dissolved. The mirror pulsed, then dimmed. When I pulled my hand back, it was mine again, whole, steady. The house was dark, normal, dusty, empty. I walked down the hall, opened the attic. Reed was gone. So was the mirror. Only a single word remained, burned into the wood. Tethered. I left the house, walked until I saw a road, a town, a world. I passed mirrors, no reflections, no whispers, just glass. I live now in motion. I carry no ID, no memories, just the feeling of having once remembered. I look into windows sometimes, into puddles. One day, she'll need another again. But for now, she sleeps. And I keep the story alive. Because that's all any of us are. Unfinished reflections, waiting for someone to look closely enough to let us through. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.